The question is that the motion be agreed to. For Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to make some remarks on this interim report. The first point I want to pick up is that the Attorney General's comment that it is an interim report, and I understand that the reasoning for that is because of the desire of the Privileges Committee to ensure that the Intelligence and Security Committee had the advantage of having this information in front of them. So when it comes time to deal with the full report and assess that, I believe that there are a number of quite serious questions to answer here. I absolutely acknowledge the point that the Attorney General has made that there have been agreements entered into over a period of time by speakers with agencies that may have the ability to come in and demand things of members of Parliament. It's important to put on the record of the Parliament the fact that we must jealously guard the rights and privileges that are afforded to us. And we've already had this discussion in the earlier debate on the earlier report of the Privileges Committee that perhaps the name parliamentary privilege doesn't encompass exactly what it is that we are talking about here. But an awful lot is invested, Mr Speaker, in the early days when you become a Member of Parliament. We're about to hear from two new members who are about to enter the fray here, that it is made very clear to us when we go through the pomp and ceremony at the start of each Parliament that how the privileges afforded to MPs are gained, and the Speaker takes a trip to Government House and there is a communication about that. It is a very important right of parliamentarians to be able to represent their constituents and to be able to undertake those conversations on behalf of their constituents, knowing that they have protection in doing that. And any notion of coercion or anything like that around these matters is something that we must be very, very concerned about. So I respect the agreements that speakers have made that govern their arrangements for the police and for the SIS in the execution of their warrants. The first and main point I want to make on that is that what I see through those agreements and indeed in what is discussed in this interim report is a very large weight upon the Speaker to be the person who acts on behalf of members of Parliament as to whether or not they are sufficiently protected and whether or not the interest of the SIS or any other agency in them is justified. And I do believe that we are investing in the Speaker a significant power, but also the pressure that may be on that individual, I think, is extremely difficult. We are talking about highly politicised situations here, and I don't believe we should enter into this area without considerable thought. Now, that is actually a matter for the final report on this particular issue, but I do think we need to give some thought as a Parliament to whether or not the Speaker needs wider support around that kind of decision. Should, for instance, there be some form of code or some general principles to which the Speaker looks to when they are making decisions about whether or not warrants are justified, whether or not members of Parliament can be included within that. I have significant concerns about what threshold would need to be passed for it to be right and proper for the SIS to be monitoring or looking into the activities of a Member of Parliament. That must, Mr Speaker, be an extremely high threshold if it is to be justifiable. And I think this Parliament needs to look very closely indeed when it comes to the final report as to whether or not we believe we as parliamentarians have sufficient protection from undue attention from those investigating agencies. Various speakers have made their decisions on that. I accept that. I understand that that is the process that we're under at the moment, but I do think we need to tread very warily indeed in those areas. The second matter, Mr Speaker, that I want to talk about is the matter for which this interim report has been created. And that is because currently the Intelligence and Security Committee is considering the Government Communications Security Bureau and related legislation amendment bill. I want to say at the outset that the Labor Party opposes that legislation. We believe that that legislation is a band-aid attempt to cover over what has been going wrong in the GCSB in recent times, the lax oversight of the Prime Minister as the Minister responsible for the GCSB, and the fact that we have never gotten to the bottom of the Kim.com case, or indeed of many other activities that have now been revealed that the GCSB is involved in. We have a report from the Inspector General of Security that tells us that there are a number of cases where it is arguable that the spying that was undertaken on New Zealanders was legal. Arguable that it was legal. Presumably that means that it is also arguable that it was illegal. But that is the situation we're now left with, and the government is determinedly rushing through legislation. I think submissions on that legislation close tomorrow, and there has not been sufficient time, in the view of the Labour Party, for submissions to be properly heard on this legislation. We are strongly of the view, Mr Speaker, that there needs to be an independent inquiry into the activities of our intelligence agencies. And I have to say that seeing this matter being referred by the Privileges Committee to the Intelligence and Security Committee only adds to that concern, because we do believe that the issues that have been raised in the committee on this are important. The matter that appears specifically in the interim report is around the question of whether or not, in extending the powers of the GCSB, which is what the legislation in front of the Intelligence and Security Committee does, by extending those powers, it means that effectively the GCSB could end up in the position of monitoring the activities of MPs. That hasn't been foreseen until now. It represents a very significant element or example rather, of the extension of the powers. Now, this report deals with the matter of the oversight of the execution of those powers. So it deals with whether or not, as MPs, we have the ability to complain to the Inspector General, what oversight the Inspector General might have over any complaint that an MP might make. But I think, Mr Speaker, it's very important to go back to the root cause of that. And the root cause of that is the extension of the powers of the GCSB, which we have not, in my view, had sufficient time or the time for the depth of study required to actually look at whether or not that is justifiable. Certainly, one of the concerns that this side of the House has had, and it's been a very topical issue in recent days, is that the GCSB is part of a wider international network. Information collected by the GCSB, as it is by the other partners in the Five Eyes network, then becomes part of a pool of information from which other countries can access. That would be a concern, I would think, Mr Speaker, if that information about MPs, as an example, was able to be accessed by foreign intelligence agencies. And that is the kind of issue that we need to investigate within a wider review. Because at the moment we have a piece of legislation about the GCSB going through. Here we have a Privileges Committee report which is actually about the SIS and the police. Yet the GCSB, through that legislation that is in front of the Intelligence and Security Committee, may well end up helping the SIS or the police in the execution of their work. So it is an extremely tricky area. I am glad that the Privileges Committee have referred this to the Intelligence and Security Committee, but they have only referred one element of the issue, the element of oversight. I believe the Intelligence and Security Committee needs to think about the privileges of MPs within the context of the whole legislation and the extension of the powers of the GCSB. The government should not be rushing that legislation through. We should have an independent inquiry into all our intelligence agencies, at which point we will be able to see where MPs fit in. I am, however, glad that this interim report will find its way to the committee.
I call Dr Kennedy Graham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the interest of the